What Elon Musk just said about Jesus left Mel Gibson in tears. The greatest story ever told wasn't told by Hollywood, Elon said, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium. It was lived by a man who never owned anything, never wrote a book, never traveled more than 100 miles from his birthplace. Yet 2,000 years later, we're still talking about him. Mel Gibson sat frozen in the front row, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. The tech mogul's words weren't what he expected to hear at this exclusive gathering of influential minds. This was supposed to be about innovation and the future, not faith. Jesus of Nazareth, Elon continued, pausing to let the name sink in. A carpenter's son who changed the world without an army, without wealth, without political power. He did it with something far more powerful, truth spoken in love. The audience of celebrities, politicians, and business leaders shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the typical tech conference rhetoric they'd come to hear. But Elon wasn't finished. "I've spent my life trying to solve humanity's biggest problems," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "But recently I've realized that the solutions I'm working on, they're just temporary fixes. The real problem, the one that's been plaguing humanity for thousands of years, was already diagnosed by someone who lived 2 millennia ago." Mel's throat tightened. As the director of the Passion of the Christ, he thought he understood Jesus' message. But something in Elon's tone suggested he was about to hear something that would shake everything he believed. "We talk about artificial intelligence surpassing human intelligence," Elon said, his voice growing more intense. "But we ignore the fact that one man already demonstrated what happens when divine intelligence operates through human form. We're trying to create consciousness in machines while ignoring the perfect consciousness that walked among us." A tear rolled down Mel's cheek. The words hit him like a physical blow. In all his years of faith, through all his struggles and redemption, he'd never heard anyone speak about Jesus with such raw intellectual honesty combined with spiritual reverence. The man who said, "Love your enemies." Do we have any idea how revolutionary that was? Elon's voice cracked slightly. In a world built on revenge and tribal warfare, he proposed something that seemed impossible, and then he lived it. Even as they were killing him, he asked his father to forgive them. The auditorium was dead silent. Mel could hear his own heartbeat. This wasn't the Elon Musk he knew from the media, the brash entrepreneur who seemed to have an answer for everything. This was someone who had clearly wrestled with questions that went far deeper than technology or business. "I used to think the greatest minds in history were scientists and inventors," Elon continued. "But I was wrong. The greatest mind that ever lived belonged to a Jewish teacher who never wrote down a single word, yet whose thoughts have been preserved, studied, and lived out by billions of people across 2,000 years. Mel's vision blurred as more tears came. He remembered the years he'd spent researching for his film, the hours of prayer and contemplation. But he'd never heard Jesus described quite like this, not as a religious figure to be worshipped from a distance, but as the most practical and revolutionary thinker who ever lived. What was Elon about to say next? The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for words that felt like they might change everything. "But here's what really gets me," Elon said, beginning to pace across the stage. "We've turned the most radical message in human history into something safe and comfortable. We've made Jesus into a poster boy for our own agendas instead of actually listening to what he said." Mel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but the tears kept coming. He dedicated years of his life to bringing Jesus' story to the screen, but now he wondered if he truly understood it at all. "Take the Sermon on the Mount," Elon continued. "This wasn't some feel-good motivational speech. This was a complete revolution in human thinking. Blessed are the poor in spirit." He's talking about people who know they don't have all the answers. In a world full of know-it-alls, he's saying the wisest people are those who understand their own limitation. The audience remained captivated, many leaning forward in their seats. This wasn't what anyone had expected from a tech conference, but nobody wanted to leave. Blessed are those who mourn. He's not just talking about grief over death. He's talking about people who are broken-hearted over the state of the world, over injustice, over their own failures. Instead of pretending everything is fine, he's saying the people who feel the pain most deeply are the ones who are closest to understanding reality. Mel's mind raced back to his own darkest moments, the alcoholism, the public scandals, the times when he felt completely broken. He'd always seen those as his lowest points, but what if they were actually when he was closest to understanding what Jesus was really talking about? And then there's our blessed are the meek, Elon said, his voice growing stronger. We think meek means weak, but the word Jesus used meant controlled strength, like a horse that chooses to be gentle. It's not about being passive. It's about having the power to destroy your enemies and choosing not to. A businessman in the third row shifted uncomfortably. These weren't the kind of leadership principles they taught in MBA programs. But this is where it gets really challenging, Elon said, stopping mid-pace to face the audience directly. Jesus didn't just preach these ideas. He lived them. When they arrested him, Peter drew a sword to fight, but Jesus told him to put it away. Here was a man who could have called down legions of angels, unlimited power, and he chose restraint. Mel felt something breaking open inside his chest. All those years of making movies about heroes who overcame their enemies through violence, and here was the ultimate hero who overcame his enemies through surrender. We admire people who fight back when they're wronged, Elon continued. We celebrate revenge stories. But Jesus introduced a concept that was completely foreign to human nature: forgiveness of enemies. Not just personal enemies, but people who are actively trying to destroy you. The room was so quiet that the air conditioning seemed loud. Mel realized he was holding his breath. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, Elon said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. What kind of mind comes up with the idea that the way to overcome evil is not to fight it with greater evil, but to absorb it and transform it through love? That's not human thinking. That's something else entirely. Mel's tears were flowing freely now. He thought about all the hatred he'd carried, all the times he'd wanted to strike back at critics and enemies. But what if there was a different way? What was Elon building toward? The intensity in the room was almost unbearable. So here's the question that's been keeping me up at night, Elon said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. If Jesus was just a good teacher, just a wise philosopher, where did these ideas come from? Because they're completely contrary to everything we know about human nature and survival. Mel's heart was pounding now. He could sense that Elon was approaching something profound, something that would force everyone in the room to make a choice about what they believed. Think about it, Elon continued. Every other religious or philosophical system is built on some version of treat others as they treat you. Buddhism teaches karma, what goes around comes around. Islam decrees justice and proportional response. Even modern secular ethics is based on reciprocity and fairness. A famous actress in the second row was crying now too, though she was trying to hide it behind her sunglasses. But Jesus said something that no human mind would naturally conceive: love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. This isn't just difficult advice. It's actually counter-evolutionary. It goes against every survival instinct we have. Mel thought about the research he'd done for his film. Every historical account confirmed that Jesus' teachings were unlike anything that had come before. Even his enemies admitted that he spoke with an authority that was different from others. And then there's the way he talked about himself, Elon said, beginning to pace again. Other great teachers pointed people toward truth, but Jesus said, I am the truth. Other teachers pointed people to a path to God. Jesus said, "I am the way." Other teachers offered life principles. Jesus said, "I am the life." The business mogul sitting next to Mel was shaking his head slightly, but his eyes never left the stage now either. This man was completely delusional, Elon said, or he was exactly who he claimed to be. There's no comfortable middle ground. C.S. Lewis was right. He was either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. The one thing he couldn't have been was just a good teacher, because good teachers don't make claims like that about themselves. Mel felt like his whole worldview was being reconstructed in real time. He'd believed in Jesus for years, but he'd never heard the case laid out with such stark clarity. "But here's what really convinced me," Elon said, and the entire room leaned forward. It wasn't just what Jesus said, it was what happened to the people who knew him best. These were not naive, gullible people. They were fishermen, tax collectors, skeptics. They lived with him for 3 years. They saw him eat, sleep, get tired, get frustrated. Elon paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Yet after his death, these same people who had abandoned him and run away when he was arrested suddenly became willing to die rather than deny what they had seen. Not die for a belief or a philosophy, but die rather than deny their testimony about specific events they claimed to have witnessed. Mel's breath caught in his throat. He'd never thought about it quite this way before. "You can die for a lie if you believe it's true," Elon said. "But you don't die for something you know is false." And these men knew whether or not they had seen Jesus alive after his crucifixion. They were the only ones who could know for certain. The implications hung in the air like electricity before a storm. "Let me tell you what I discovered when I actually started investigating this seriously," Elon said, his tone becoming more conversational, but losing none of its intensity. "I approach everything like an engineer. I look at the data. I test hypotheses. I try to find the simplest explanation that accounts for all the observable facts." Mel sat on the edge of his seat. As someone who had spent years researching the historical Jesus, he was fascinated to hear how someone with Elon's analytical mind had approached the same questions, including who he said he was. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Elon took a step forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. If Jesus was right about love, mercy, forgiveness, and truth, then maybe he was right when he said, "I and the Father are one." Maybe he wasn't just a moral teacher. Maybe he really was the Son of God. Mel felt his heart stop. He had spent years believing that. He'd built an entire film around it. But hearing Elon, a man of science and reason, say it so plainly, so logically, so vulnerably, it was as if he were hearing it for the first time. Elon continued, "And if that's true, if Jesus really was who he said he was, then that changes everything. Not just our beliefs. Not just our values. It changes the way we live, the way we lead, the way we love. It means that the universe isn't random. It means there's a purpose to all of this." He paused, looking out across the faces of the audience. Some were in tears. Some sat frozen. But all were listening. I used to think that technological progress was the key to saving the world. And don't get me wrong, it matters. We need innovation. We need bold thinking. But technology can't fix the human heart. Mel felt like someone had reached inside his chest and touched something raw and sacred. Elon's next words came soft, almost a whisper. Only love can do that. The kind of love Jesus demonstrated. A love that sacrifices. A love that forgives. A love that sees every human being, even the worst of us, as worth saving. He took one final step toward the edge of the stage. "That's why I believe we need more than innovation. We need transformation. And the only person I've found who can truly bring that kind of transformation is Jesus of Nazareth." A hush fell over the room, not from shock but from awe. Mel sat with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by a presence he couldn't explain. He wasn't the only one. People all around the auditorium were weeping, praying silently, or simply sitting stunned by the clarity and conviction of what they had just heard. Elon didn't offer an altar call. He didn't tell anyone what they should believe. He simply stood there for a moment longer, allowing the weight of what he'd said to settle over the room. Then he stepped back from the podium, nodded once, and walked off the stage. No applause followed. Not because the audience wasn't moved, but because clapping felt too small for what had just happened. It wasn't a performance. It was a revelation. Mel stayed in his seat long after the lights had come up. He couldn't move. Not because he was paralyzed, but because something inside him had come alive in a way he didn't understand yet. Something deep. Something holy. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a director or a celebrity or even a believer trying to hold on to faith in a cynical world. He felt like a man who had just heard the truth, again, and finally understood it.